When we talk about angels and their appearance, again, it's one thing to sort of just, needle the idea that angels have wings and they don't. Again, the Bible doesn't describe them that way. It describes them as just looking like normal people. And that's important to recognize. Again, it's consistent with Hebrews 13 about entertaining angels unawares. But there's a little bit more to it. It's important to talk about how there are a number of occasions where people could be led to say, well, wasn't that just a vision? In other words, are angels appearing in corporeal form, bodily form, like you could reach out and touch one and they could touch you, or is it just a vision? So you actually get a little bit of both in the Bible, in both Testaments. If there are contexts where angels are being seen sort of in a heavenly scene, that's very clearly a vision. Even when you get this transport language, the same episode will often be called a vision. So that is definitely on the table. That definitely happens. But you do have instances where angels do physical things. Genesis 18 and 19 is probably the textbook example of this, where God himself and two men, so you have these three men come to Abraham and they have a meal. Again, we find out as the chapter goes on, after the meal, that one of them is God, and then the two others were angels. They're actually called angels in Genesis 19, which continues that whole storyline. That's obviously a physical occurrence. They do physical things. In Genesis 19, those two angels grab Lot and pull him into the house. There's a physical act. So you do get this, even in the New Testament. The incident with Peter being delivered from the prison. The angel has to hit him. Wake up, it's time to get out of here. So it's more than just a visionary appearance. So that kind of thing does happen as well. There's no passage in Scripture that actually talks about an offer of salvation to angels. And so some people think that, well, the question's still open then, because it isn't specifically denied either. I would say it's denied, though, by implication. If you go to Hebrews 2, God is, giving us the whole plan of salvation. That is necessarily linked to the incarnation. Hebrews 2 is the chapter about Jesus being above angels, superior to angels. To which of the angels did God say this or that? Again, comparing them with Jesus. And we tend to look at that passage just sort of for the comparative language to assert the superiority, the preeminence of Jesus, and all that's legitimate. But I think we need to stop and think about the part of the chapter that takes all of that and then links it to the fact that Jesus was a man. God became man. And that is linked to, it is essential to the plan of salvation that God enacts through that act. So what we have there, it raises the question of, when it comes to the plan of salvation, why is it in the Bible sort of aimed at humanity? And the answer is because the solution to not just the Genesis 3 dilemma, but all of the human condition, the solution for that was for God to become a man. By implication, he doesn't become an angel. He doesn't become whatever that other thing is to save them, but he does become a man, and that is the linchpin event for the salvation of humanity. And that's actually part of the teaching of Hebrews 2. This is why the plan of salvation is what it is. It's why it played out the way it did. Incarnation as a human being is an essential part of that. And so since you don't get that for angels, by implication, I would say indirectly, that amounts to a denial that they're even part of the picture here. The flip side, though, is explicitly mentioned. As far as those who are in rebellion, they are going to have a final end. I mean, you get this language in Psalm 82. God says to them in Psalm 82, verse 6, you're sons of the Most High, all of you, you're Elohim, nevertheless you're going to die like men. And that sounds really odd to our ear because, well, they're not by nature embodied, so how do you do that? How do you kill them off? And what it's really telegraphing is that, look, the God who brought you into existence can end your existence. In other words, every being, whether it's a heavenly being or an earthly being, whether it's human or animal or something else, every form of life is contingent except for one. Again, except for the God of the Bible. All other life is contingent because it's derivative from something he did. And so it puts forth the idea that the Creator has the power to give life, to create life, and he also has the power to take it away, to withdraw it, to terminate it. So it's not really sort of a prescription for a how, but it's just making a statement that the one who gave you life can end it as well and is going to. And if you go forward into the New Testament, and you actually get Second Temple period language about this as well, the final destination is one of annihilation, destruction, okay, that sort of thing. Their existence is terminated at some point, and it's usually associated with the day of the Lord, the end of days, how Scripture describes that. So there is this sense that there is an angel eschatology, but it's only really spoken of in terms of the ones who are in rebellion, in terms of their final destruction. The ones who are not, again, we just assume that they continue on in life because that is what God intended in Eden anyway. So when Eden is restored, they go on, they're loyal to him, and then we join that number as the redeemed. I often get the question of, well, could all this happen again? Is it possible, given the fact that the members of the heavenly host are derivative, they're contingent, they're lesser, they're not perfect, in other words, they're not God, and they are created to image or represent him, and they are equipped to do that by God sharing his attributes with them, just like with humanity. And one of those attributes is freedom. They can make an uncoerced decision, and they did. So, could they do that again? Church tradition answers this question by no, of course not. And if you ask, well, where's the verse for that? Then, the crickets can start chirping, because there actually isn't any verse that guarantees this cannot happen again. We just sort of assume that. And I think it's partly assumed because there's no really statement about anything kind of beyond the new Eden or really a set of circumstances there. But the fact remains there is no verse that actually makes all that concrete. Now, that opens the door again to this possibility. And I'm okay with that, because I'm not going to close a door that Scripture sort of leaves open, or at least says is in the realm of possibility, only because they are not God. They are still lesser beings. I mean, you get the same question about, well, when we're in the new earth and we don't lose our free will, so could we even sin there after we're glorified? It's the same issue. Okay, you got me. We're less than God, and by implication, we cannot be perfect like God is. But there's a real difference between, we'll call that a possibility, and a plausibility. And the way I always illustrate this is, hey, it's possible that I could win a Nobel Prize and an Academy Award and be the next American Idol all in the same year. That's possible, isn't it? There's nothing cosmically that forbids that. Again, you're arguing for a possibility that is actually an absurdity, but you still have to call it a possibility. So sure, yeah, we'll go away and say that this is possible. There's nothing in Scripture that says it can't happen. But that's a whole lot different than saying it makes sense and it might happen, or it will. Two totally different things. Along with this question, we get the language of rebellion in a later book like Revelation. Okay, this is actually the only passage in the Bible where it connects a third, that word third, with the word angel, a third of the angels. In response to the birth of Christ, there's a war in heaven. I tend to think that what we have going on there is those people who are already on Satan's side, they're going to sort of muster the troops. They're going to come together collectively and try to, they can't eliminate, they can't stop the birth, but now that the child is born, now we have a spiritual warfare to either get rid of the child or somehow stop him from accomplishing his purpose. So I don't think we have a new rebellion there. But again, it is sort of an item that academics like to debate. When you get into the subject of the heavenly host, one of the natural questions is, okay, what do they do? We can't just sort of answer this question by depending on single words. We actually have to look in other places and really be a more careful reader. When we do that, it's actually really useful because we discover the heavenly host doing something that typically, again, in our tradition, we don't think that they would do, and that is assisting God with decision-making or issuing decrees. And right away, again, if that's unfamiliar to you, you're thinking, whoa, that just can't be, because God's omniscient. He doesn't need any help, doing that. Well, there are actually passages where God does engage his heavenly host this way. And the point is not that God needs help. God doesn't need help. He doesn't need an entourage. He doesn't need a bureaucracy. He doesn't need a council. He doesn't need anything. But God chooses to involve the intelligent beings that he has created to represent him in the decisions that he makes, in the things that he does. God does this with the church. God doesn't need us. He doesn't need you. But nevertheless, he incorporates you into what he wants done. He gives you meaningful participation using the gift of free will, sharing of that attribute with you. So in the heavenly sphere, you get passages like 1 Kings 22, 19 through 23, where God has decreed, it's already settled, that it's time for Ahab to die. And that's long overdue, by the time you get to 1 Kings 22, because Ahab's just awful. But it's time for Ahab to die, and so there's a heavenly council meeting. It's not that God lacks ideas. He wants to see these beings help. He wants to make them participants. In Daniel 4, you get this. You have a watcher, a holy one, come to Nebuchadnezzar with a message that basically says, because you're so arrogant and you have not given the Most High credit, you're going to go insane for a while. You're going to eat grass. Again, we're familiar with the story. But what the watcher says to Nebuchadnezzar in the process of giving him this information is, he says, this sentence is by decree of the watchers. And it's plural. So it's a group decision. And then a few verses later, he says, this is going to happen to you by decree of the Most High. So this is important because even though God allows participation, he doesn't intend for the participation to be autonomous. He's still sovereign. They work in tandem. They're not independent authorities or anything like that. You get the same thing in Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 10. We have a meeting. The Ancient of Days is there, and we've got the heavenly host there, and the thrones, plural, are set. The court seats, the council, members take their seat. And why are they there? They are there to decide on the fate of the four beasts in Daniel's vision, which are these four empires. But again, it's a council scene. God is enlisting, allowing, encouraging, participation of the members of his heavenly host in the decrees that he is going to issue, or he lets them decide how to carry things out. And so they do have this meaningful role, and I think it's a really good analogy to the church. Again, God doesn't need any of this, but he likes to have his family members, his children, also be partners.